Luke had always believed himself to be a man of simple routines and quiet joys. So when he thought he'd rescued a young whale stranded in the storm, the truth awaiting him at the vet was something he could never have anticipated. It all began on a stormy evening, the kind of night when the rain seemed to fall sideways, hammering down like nature's fury. Luke parked his car, bracing against the wind as he sprinted toward his front door. Just as he reached it, a faint, plaintive whine stopped him in his tracks. The sound was barely audible over the downpour, but it tugged at him, persistent and desperate. His curiosity, or perhaps his compassion, urged him to investigate. The rain soaked through his jacket as he followed the sound, his shoes squelching noisily across the wet grass. At the edge of his property, finally hidden among the bushes, he found it, a tiny, trembling figure. At first, Luke wasn't sure what he was looking at. The creature was huddled under a bush, shaking violently. As he drew closer, he saw its frightened eyes, wide with fear, staring back at him. His heart softened. "It's okay," he murmured softly, crouching down and extending his hand. "I won't hurt you." The little creature didn't move at first, clearly torn between fear and the need for help. Slowly, it crept toward him, its body visibly frail. Luke gently scooped it up, careful not to startle it further, and wrapped it in his jacket. The creature was so light that it felt like holding a bundle of feathers. Inside his warm, cozy home, Luke placed the trembling guest on a soft towel near the fireplace. The room was filled with the earthy scent of rain and the soothing hum of jazz music, a habit Luke had cultivated to keep his plants happy. He dried the creature off, speaking in a low, comforting tone all the while. It was then that he noticed something unusual. The creature's fur was patterned with strange markings, and its ears were longer than any he'd seen on a dog. It didn't resemble any breed he knew, and yet it looked so small and fragile. His curiosity deepened. As the creature lapped at the warm milk he offered, Luke couldn't help but smile. "Where did you come from, little one?" he asked aloud, though he received no answer, only the soft sound of milk being swallowed. He decided to name the animal Storm, a nod to the chaos in which it had entered his life. Storm seemed unusually quiet. Unlike a puppy, there were no playful barks or excited tail wags. Instead, the creature lay curled up in a tight ball, its breathing finally slowing as it drifted to sleep. Luke watched it with a mix of wonder and unease. Who or what was this mysterious guest? As the rain continued to batter the windows, Luke resolved to bring Storm to the vet in the morning. Perhaps they could find a microchip or any clue about where this little one had come from. But tonight, he would provide it with warmth and safety, a small haven from the stormy world outside. When morning came, the weather was as clear and bright as if the storm had never happened. Luke felt a renewed sense of purpose as he prepared for the day. He even bought a small plush toy, hoping to lighten the mood for Storm. But something about the creature was off. Storm's gaze remained fixed on the window, its eyes scanning the world beyond with a strange intensity. What was Storm looking for? And why did it feel as though this little guest was hiding secrets of its own? As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the peaceful neighborhood, Luke couldn't shake the unease growing in his chest. Storm, his peculiar new companion, seemed far from ordinary. Sitting by the window, her gaze was fixated on the world outside, her eyes sharp and unrelenting. Luke couldn't help but feel both concern and confusion. "Why don't you act like a wolf? Or even a dog?" he mused aloud, trying to make sense of the strange creature. But Storm offered no answers, only the silent intensity of her watchful stare. Determined to understand her origins, Luke slipped a temporary leash around Storm's neck. With soft words of encouragement, he coaxed her into the car and set off for the local vet. Maybe there he could find the clarity he desperately sought. At the clinic, Luke was greeted by a receptionist whose cheerful smile dimmed as she delivered unwelcome news. "Dr. Ellis isn't available today. Family emergency." only routine vaccinations, and flu treatments are being offered. Dr. Peterson will be covering next week if you'd like to schedule an appointment. Disheartened but not defeated, Luke thanked her and headed back to the car. He glanced at Storm as he settled into the driver's seat. To his surprise, she seemed oddly relieved to be leaving the clinic. Quiet and composed, she rested on the back seat, occasionally locking eyes with Luke in the rearview mirror. Her expression, though unreadable, carried an inexplicable depth. "What are you trying to tell me, Storm?" Luke wondered aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Days turned into weeks, and Luke's bond with Storm deepened, though her mysteries only multiplied. She moved with precision through the house, her steps deliberate and measured, ignoring the squeaky toys and bones Luke had bought. Her attention was almost always drawn to the window, her sharp eyes tracking movements outside like a vigilant sentinel. At night, Storm's behavior grew even more unsettling. She sat at Luke's bedside, ears pricked, toward the darkest corners of the room. When faint, sorrowful sounds echoed through the neighborhood, perhaps a distant cry or a rustle in the wind, Storm emitted a deep, guttural growl. It wasn't the playful bark of a dog or even the low howl of a wolf. It was something primal, ancient, and wild. Luke often found himself awake, watching her in the dim light, his mind swirling with questions. "What are you, Storm?" he murmured, his voice tinged with awe and unease. Driven by curiosity and a touch of nervous energy, Luke turned to his blog. Originally a space for his coding projects and hiking adventures, it now became a chronicle of Storm's unusual behaviors. He detailed her habits, her watchfulness, and the eerie noises she made at night. His first post, titled "My Puppy, Not a Puppy," Maine Whelp, Keen Whelp, quickly gained traction. Videos of Storm pacing like a soldier on patrol, her intense focus on the outdoors, and her haunting growls captured the imagination of his followers. Comments flooded in, ranging from skepticism to genuine concern. "Maybe she's part wolf," one user suggested. "She could be an exotic breed, like a Basenji or a Carolina dog," theorized another. But some ideas were far more fantastical. What if she's a wild animal, like a coyote or something even rarer? Luke read each comment with growing intrigue. The mysteries surrounding Storm were no longer his alone. His once quiet corner of the internet had become a hub of speculation and debate. Yet, amidst all the excitement, a quiet worry lingered in Luke's heart. The peculiarities of Storm's behavior, her unrelenting vigilance, and those haunting sounds at night, they all pointed to something he wasn't ready to admit. What if Storm wasn't meant for the life he was offering her? The online debate surrounding Storm continued to grow, fueled by theories that ranged from plausible to fantastical. Some claimed she was a rare wolf breed or a hybrid dog with unique lineage. Others suggested she could be an exotic animal, far removed from any domesticated species. As local animal lovers and experts chimed in, the comments on Luke's blog became a whirlwind of curiosity. Storm's vigilance and the haunting cries she made at night were seen as clues to a wild ancestry, while others crafted wilder ideas, wondering if Luke had stumbled upon a creature seldom seen in North Carolina. The flood of speculation ignited something in Luke. His curiosity, once a spark, had grown into a burning need for answers. He began documenting Storm's behavior with meticulous detail, sharing more videos and observations. The quiet corner of the internet that had once been his personal retreat transformed into a bustling hub of discussion. But the more theories he read, the less satisfied he felt. Storm's piercing eyes and her nightly watchfulness weighed on him. As much as he had grown attached to her, Luke knew he couldn't ignore the signs any longer. He needed professional insights, answers that could either confirm or dispel the growing mystery. The following week, Luke made a second attempt at the vet. This time, he booked an appointment with Dr. Peterson, who had a reputation for handling even the most unusual cases. As the day approached, Luke's emotions became a tangle of concern and excitement. Would he finally uncover the truth about Storm? Or would the answers only deepen the questions? The drive to the clinic was uneventful, but as Luke pulled into the parking lot, the scene inside the building was anything but calm. The waiting room was alive with the chaotic energy of an animal clinic, barking dogs, meowing cats, and the occasional squawk from a bird. Luke held Storm's leash tightly as they entered, his grip a reflection of the knot in his stomach. Storm, as usual, was calm yet alert. Her presence seemed to command attention, drawing curious gazes from everyone in the room. A woman whispered to her companion, nodding discreetly in Luke and Storm's direction. Though their words were inaudible, Luke could feel the weight of their stares. He shifted, uncomfortably, glancing down at Storm. She briefly met his gaze, her sharp eyes speaking of something he couldn't quite understand, before turning her attention back to the room. Is she really just a dog? Luke thought, his mind swirling with doubt. The murmurs around him echoed his own unease, amplifying the surreal nature of the past few weeks. Finally, his number was called. With a deep breath, Luke stood and guided Storm toward the examination room. Each step felt heavy, as though he was walking toward an answer that could change everything. Inside the room, Luke knelt beside Storm, stroking her fur gently as they waited. The clinical smell of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with the distant hum of muffled conversations and the occasional bark. Storm was tense, her body rigid with an awareness Luke had come to recognize. She seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen. When the door opened and Dr. Peterson entered, clipboard in hand, Luke rose to meet him. The vet's calm demeanor and steady voice gave Luke a flicker of hope. "All right, let's take a look at her," Dr. Peterson said, his tone professional but kind. Luke nodded, his heart pounding as the vet approached. The answers he sought were moments away, yet Luke couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't ready for what he was about to learn. Storm's body was tense as Luke guided her toward the examination room. Her muscles rippled under his touch, her sharp eyes scanning every corner of the clinic with unrelenting focus. Sensing her unease, Luke knelt and patted her gently. "It's okay, Storm. We're just here to get some answers," he whispered, hoping his voice could calm her. But as they neared the door, something primal took over. Storm's instincts flared to life. In a sudden, powerful burst, she wrenched free from Luke's grasp. Her leash slipped from his hands as she bolted down the hallway. "Storm!" Luke yelled, his voice cracking with panic. The waiting area erupted into chaos. A Labrador barked wildly, pulling at its owner's grip. Terrified cat clawed its way out of a transport cage, hissing and spitting. Children screamed as Storm zigzagged through the crowded space, her tail a blur of movement. Luke's heart raced as he darted after her, his voice hoarse from shouting her name. A young vet, assistant named Jake, quick on his feet and sharper than most, joined the chase. Together, they followed Storm into a storage room filled with supplies and a few shelter animals. The room was narrow and suffocating, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and nervous animals. Storm's wild eyes darted around, searching for an escape, her chest heaving with heavy breaths. Cornered but desperate, she backed into a stack of boxes, her movements betraying both fear and defiance. With careful teamwork, Luke and Jake managed to corner her. As they reached out cautiously, she finally relented, her energy spent. Her trembling body sagged as Luke wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "It's okay, Storm," he murmured, his voice breaking with relief. On the way back to the examination room, Luke apologized profusely to the other pet owners. His cheeks burned with embarrassment, but his eyes betrayed genuine worry. Storm's escape had rattled him more than he cared to admit. Dr. Peterson was waiting when they returned. His expression, calm but curious, betrayed none of the chaos that had just unfolded. Raising an eyebrow, he quipped, a bit of a temperament. "Bundle, Huh? Luke forced a weak smile, his nerves still raw. He sat down with Storm while Jake held her. Firmly, her body still trembling from the ordeal. The room fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by Storm's labored breathing. Dr. Peterson donned his gloves with deliberate precision, his eyes studying Storm with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "Let's see what we're dealing with," he said as he began the examination. The vet moved with practiced expertise, his hands gentle but thorough as he palpated Storm's body. She remained unervingly still, though her eyes darted around the room, observing every detail. Outside the window, curious faces from the waiting room pressed against the glass. Drawn by the earlier commotion, Dr. Peterson opened Storm's mouth and paused, his forehead furrowed as he examined her. Teeth, sharp and pronounced, far more suited for a predator than a typical house pet. He stepped back slightly, his professional composure giving way to visible discomfort. "These aren't the teeth of a dog," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. His expression darkened as he carefully observed Storm's features, piecing together a troubling realization. Dr. Peterson turned to Luke, his voice now sharper, more urgent. "What do you call this animal?" he asked, peering at Luke over the edge of his glasses. "Storm," Luke replied hesitantly. "And where did you find her? How long have you had her? Is this your first visit to a vet?" Luke answered each question, his voice growing smaller as the room's atmosphere grew heavier. With every detail he provided, Dr. Peterson's eyebrows climbed higher, his movements quickening with growing urgency. Finally, the vet turned to Jake, who stood nearby, still holding Storm securely. Jake shook his head in disbelief. Then, in a hushed voice, he said something that froze Luke in place. "This isn't a hybrid, or even a rare dog breed." Luke's chest tightened. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. "Then what is she?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Dr. Peterson's gaze met Luke's, a mixture of concern and gravity in his eyes. "Luke," he began, "the animal you've brought in isn't a dog at all." Luke's world tilted, his breath catching in his throat. The truth about Storm was about to shatter. Everything he thought he knew. "That's not a dog's bark," Dr. Peterson said, his voice low but weighted with concern. Luke froze, his heart pounding in his chest. His eyes darted to Storm, who sat quietly, her sharp gaze moving between the humans in the room. What are you saying?" Luke stammered. Dr. Peterson took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Luke, the animal you've brought in is not a dog. She's a hyena. A young male hyena, to be exact." The words hit Luke like a thunderclap. The room seemed to shrink, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. He stared at Storm, his mind racing. A hyena? It didn't seem possible. Sensing Luke's shock, Dr. Peterson softened his tone. "I understand this is a lot to process," he said gently, "but it's the truth. You've brought in a young spotted hyena, an animal that's incredibly rare in this region." Luke's legs felt weak. "A hyena?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Peterson nodded. Her malnourished state likely masked many of her typical traits, which is why she seemed so ambiguous. But her teeth, her gait, her behavior, it all fits now. "She's not a dog, Luke. She's a wild predator." The revelation unraveled a tangle of emotions in Luke. Relief, confusion, and a growing sense of dread all fought for space in his mind. Storm's peculiar behaviors, the nightly growls, the guarded watchfulness, the primal intensity in her eyes, suddenly made sense. But understanding brought new questions and challenges. Dr. Peterson explained the gravity of the situation. Hyenas aren't just unusual. They're potentially dangerous, even at a young age. They have strong survival instincts and behaviors that can't be suppressed. She's not suited for a domestic life. The words stung, but Luke knew they were true. As much as he wanted to believe he could care for Storm, deep down he realized she needed more than he could provide. Dr. Peterson began making calls to local wildlife authorities and a nearby wildlife reserve, initiating the process of finding a proper home for Storm. The atmosphere in the clinic shifted as everyone worked swiftly yet carefully. "Make sure the cage is spacious and comfortable," Dr. Peterson instructed Jake, his voice steady but firm. "We need to handle this with both caution and compassion." Luke watched the preparations with a heavy heart. The cage, lined with soft padding and equipped with calming aids, looked more like a temporary sanctuary than a prison, but the sight of it still filled Luke with a deep ache. "Is all this really necessary?" Luke asked, his voice tinged with worry. "Storm's never shown aggression. She's always been gentle." Dr. Peterson placed a reassuring hand on Luke's shoulder. "I know this is hard," he said softly, "but this isn't about punishment. It's about safety, yours, hers, and everyone else's. Hyenas are wild animals. Even if Storm hasn't shown aggression yet, her instincts could take over in a stressful environment like this." Luke nodded slowly, though his heart felt like it was breaking. Dr. Peterson continued, his voice calm and measured. "We've prepared this space to ensure she's as comfortable as possible. The cage is just a precaution until we can get her to the wildlife reserve. There, she'll have the care and environment she needs to thrive." As Jake carefully guided Storm into the spacious enclosure, Luke knelt beside her one last time. Her sharp eyes softened as she looked at him, her body visibly calmer than before. "You're going to be okay," Luke whispered, his voice cracking. "You're special, Storm. I just want what's best for you." Storm tilted her head slightly, as if she understood his words. The connection between them, a bond forged in uncertainty and trust, felt unbreakable in that moment. Luke watched as Storm settled into the cage, her wild essence still present but tempered by the care and understanding she'd received. He knew he was making the right decision, even if it felt like his heart was being torn in two. Dr. Peterson's calm and steady demeanor was a beacon for Luke as he tried to process the shocking revelation. The vet's thoughtful approach eased the storm of emotions swirling inside him, giving Luke a sense of clarity in the face of this unexpected situation. The once bustling room grew quiet as preparations were made to move Storm to a safer, more suitable environment. Jake, handling her with care, gently guided Storm into her newly prepared cage. The soft bedding and calming atmosphere seemed designed not just for safety but to honor her dignity as a wild creature. Luke watched in silence, his heart growing heavier with every step Storm took away from him. Her big, sad eyes met his through the cage's bars, and he felt a wave of guilt crash over him. He couldn't shake the thought that he had failed her somehow, even though he knew in his heart that this was the right decision. Alone in the dimly lit isolation room, Luke sat beside Storm, his emotions a quiet storm of their. He thought back to the moment she had entered his life, a frightened, trembling creature, hidden in the rain. From the very beginning, there had been something extraordinary about her. This wasn't just about rescuing a lost animal. It was about the bond they had formed, a connection that transcended her wild nature. Storm wasn't just a hyena. She was a reminder of the unexpected beauty and complexity of life, a force that had touched Luke in ways he hadn't thought possible. As they waited for the wildlife experts to arrive, Storm slowly approached the side of the cage, where Luke sat. Her movements were deliberate, almost hesitant, but there was no fear in her. As Luke reached out, his hand trembling slightly, Storm leaned forward and gave his fingers a soft lick, followed by a gentle nudge of her head against his hand. The gesture was simple yet profound, a silent thank you, a farewell that words could never capture. In that fleeting moment, their bond spoke volumes. It told a story of trust, care, and understanding. Luke felt the weight of his guilt lift ever so slightly as he saw Storm lying calmly in her cage, her breathing steady and her posture relaxed. For the first time since the ordeal began, Luke felt a sense of peace. He knew he was giving Storm a chance, a chance to live as she was meant to, free and cared for in an environment that understood her wild nature. As the wildlife team arrived to transport Storm to her new home, Luke stood by, watching with a mixture of sadness and determination. This was not the end of their story, he realized. It was the beginning of a new chapter for Storm, one where she could thrive. Luke's encounter with Storm had changed him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. It was a reminder of the importance of understanding and respecting the natural world. A lesson in compassion, humility, and the unexpected connections that life can bring. He hoped that others, too, could learn from this experience. As he shared the story with the world, he asked his audience, "Would you have let Storm go just as I did? What would you have done in my place?" Luke took one last look at Storm as the cage was loaded into the transport vehicle. Her eyes met his, not with sadness but with something that felt like acceptance. And then she was gone. Storm's story is one of unexpected bonds and the beauty of letting go. If you found her journey as touching as I did, please leave a like and subscribe to say goodbye to Storm. Let her story remind us all of the importance of respecting the wild and the creatures who inhabit it. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.